All right, my friend. Well, we get to do this here little interview thing. I guess the first point on that list that we were looking at was introducing a little bit about myself, but also a little bit about you, right? A little bit of who we are and what we do before we talk about this here brand and Rennsport.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Me first.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my background is from music. I used to tour manage bands for probably like a decade. And that sounds so weird to say, but about 10 years of my life, I was in the music industry, didn't play any music, but I was very much behind the scenes, but learned a lot from that. And I always say that I liked music and loved cars. And more recently in my life, I switched my career to be in automotive and I've loved it. And somewhere along those lines, I started a podcast and also found a deep love for learning people's stories. At first, it started with just the music industry. And quickly, I learned that it was more just creative careers and talking to people who do what they love. And I kind of felt like there was a void with how I built this, where I loved that model. I loved hearing from companies like that, but I can't really always relate to like the Ben and Jerry's story. So I wanted to hear from people that were deeper into my interests. So that was the podcast. And through that, it kind of opened up me being a podcast host and a live event host. So I guess that's what qualifies me to be here with you. I also work with you at Race Service and get to do fun projects with you with Rennsport being one of them. So I guess we'll talk about that too.
Well, we really owe it to Sarah Lassick that we connected in the way that we did. And I know we had a immediate connection over our shared interest in base cars, base
Yes.
models. And so we kind of had this this sort of moment of inspiration when Sarah and I arrived, but then also we can get into that later. But it's also kind of an interesting connection where your background in music, there's also a connection there. I started doing technical theater in high school, and I love building sets and doing lighting, but eventually I did a lot of sound, and I became really interested in sound, and that kind of changed through end of high school into college. I ended up running soundboards quite a lot, and I could never go anywhere as a musician. My parents certainly tried, and I think I think it was guitar, piano, clarinet, something else, maybe not in that order. And then finally, I was kicked off a bell choir. They put me at the very end with the biggest bell that rang maybe once a night, and I didn't get that right either. And so the strange thing was I had an ear for a room. I had an ear for live sound. And so I had some really good teachers and people who trained me. And I loved it enough that I started looking into going to Berklee School of Music for college. Ultimately, I didn't do that and became a business major because I thought I was safe. And that changed into writing about cars to be around cars. So we're different in terms of when that decision happened. But interestingly, I did about 20 years of live sound,
Yeah.
and I couldn't make the music, but I loved translating it for audiences and
Yeah.
working with musicians. I loved it. And I think the thing I loved the most about that role back there on the soundboard was one of my early teachers said, if you do your job right, no one knows you were there.
Yeah.
And of course, the corollary to that is if you've got feedback or you make an error, everyone turns around. The show
Yeah.
is over.
Yeah.
And that lesson actually really parlayed well into editing a magazine because as a magazine editor, I do some writing too, but as a magazine editor, what you're really there to do is run the soundboard. You're really there to make others shine.
Yeah.
And if you've done your job well, you make them, you make their performance better for the audience, and no one knows you were there. So that musician background it's an interesting one to explore. There might be some more for you and I to find in that.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you touched on being the editor of a magazine and how that also kind of relates, because I think to also preface yourself and kind of answer it for me in a funny way, we've become such good friends. We talk all the time, but I don't know the magazine industry. I don't know the print industry. Can you explain to me in like super simple terms, like the role, like you're technically the co-founder and chief editor of Triple Zero magazine, correct?
Yeah.
So
So,
explaining that simply, like what does that involve? How does that put you in it all?
well, basically, we're nuts, but I I was the editor in chief for two magazines previously, a magazine called Excellence, which I started at after college and was fortunate to work there for 15 years. It was a phenomenal education in the business. And it was a more traditional magazine, newsstand, advertising, and so forth. And then I was hired by the Porsche Club of America to redesign and sort of reimagine, as it were, Panorama, which was at that time a 55-year-old club magazine. And what was interesting there is they were hungry for change. And so we kind of, what I liked there was no more newsstand waste, because no one likes to talk about it, but a very high percentage of magazines that were traditional newsstand are quote unquote recycled. But recycling it's a mixed bag. And so there's a tremendous amount of waste if you think about the fuel and paper and everything else. So I was quite interested in the Panorama experiment. And then around 2015, 2016, the leap that I thought was really wild to Panorama from Excellence, leaving the newsstand. It was a really fun project, really successful project, built a fun team. But some ideas were percolating to go further and to maybe try a magazine without the ads, or most of them. And so I founded 000 with one of the sounding boards for the project, a long time friend named Alexander Pilevsky. So I work with him closely on editorial. We met when I was at Excellence, and both of us were just out of college. And so we worked there for 2 years together, and our friendship continued. We would go for a drive more often than not every year for 20 some odd years. And then we kind of, much like you and I have this connection in music and cars, Alex and I were friends from the start because of a shared experience in our childhoods of reading these car magazines. When we were little kids, Car and Driver, Road and Track would show up. And we both had this unbridled enthusiasm because we knew that when that magazine arrived, this is before internet, before a lot of this stuff, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, really 80s, we would, and early 90s, we were so thrilled because this thing came in the mailbox with all of our parents' bills. And we knew that hours of enjoyment were ahead, like hours of pouring through these pages.
It's your
and gleaning outlet. Information.
It's that thing. I was just thinking about this earlier today. So funny. But I was thinking about like the television shows, like Monster Garage and Pimp My Ride. And for me, it was this age before the internet where you had to find these little channels and these outlets, and they maybe weren't even directly in line with your interests, but you would take anything you could get. If it was a car, if it had four wheels, it was the thing that you were like, okay, I'll watch it. I just want to learn and know. And I think about you explaining magazines in that era, and it's like you probably didn't care if it was like an American minivan on the cover or a European sports car. It was just like, here's a magazine full of cars, front to back, in a world where this is your interest and it's anything you can find in it, right? It's like a privilege. It's such a treat to get something like that, huh?
Well,
okay.
I think you raise a really interesting point. You raise a really interesting point with that, because, and please hold that next question, because I do want to. I do want to go over it.
Of course,
whatever it is. But you raised a really interesting point about back then. So now we're in the age of everything. We're in the age of we're in the information age, or post-information age, coming perhaps in some ways. But we have everything. We have access to everything. And one of the interesting things, data points for me, is I often see new cars in parking lots. And the first time I ever see one is at the supermarket, or the first time I ever see a car is in a parking lot at the airport or on the street. And I think, I didn't even know that was coming. When I was a kid, and when Alex was a kid, there was no way anything was showing up anywhere in our lives that we hadn't already seen in a car magazine. And we knew it was coming. And I don't think we necessarily prided ourselves, but we were so switched on as kids that if a celebrity Eurosport VR showed up at a Chevy Celebrity Eurosport VR wagon showed up at the market, we're like, oh yeah, I know. You already knew exactly what it was,
right? Because
you had read about it in Car and Driver or Road and Track. So I think at some level, we now have access to so much more information, but I still miss two things. I miss that anticipation of something coming that's physical. And then also our challenge was, well, how do we create something physical where it rekindles that feeling of, I've got hours of enjoyment ahead, and I know I can't get this information anywhere else. And that is a difficult thing to do in the year 2023. But in 2016, we said, okay, let's build a business model that we think can support this sort of wild dive into information around Porsche.
Okay, so you actually just got into where my question was going. How about that? It's like we're friends or something.
How about that?
I guess I wanted to ask you. Clearly, the internet is available. You can get all this information, but your simple statement of what 000 is in this day and age, like I know how I explain it to my friends that don't know what it is, but I'm really curious, like in a short explanation, how you would explain it to a stranger that doesn't know what it is, because I think there's a lot in that. So what is that explanation now?
Well, there's two that we sort of discuss. One is that it's an art criticism that just happens to be about Porsche. And the other, for more car magazine style people, is it's sort of the Spinal Tap of car magazines. I mean, it's so far out of it's definitely a pretty wild product.
Yeah.
But again, we circle back to this idea. I mean, it's a 3-pound magazine.
Yeah. Yeah.
We only called it a magazine to keep it approachable. We decided early on we didn't want to call it a quarterly or a journal because it sounded a little stuffy.
Yeah.
But really, it's a 260-page magazine that's a book. So we're putting out a book every quarter, effectively. But it's not a book because magazines, by their nature, were always agile. You never part of the fun of that thing showing up in the mailbox was you didn't know what was going to be in it. A little bit like a box of chocolates. And there's some entertainment value in the discovery.
Yeah.
So it's a little difficult to pin down, but when we're forced to come up with one-liners, it's the typical one is it's an art criticism that just happens to be about Porsche.
Nice. I say that it's a super premium Porsche magazine. So it's if you want to take a deep dive and learn about the brand and experience it in more of an artful way, that's how I interpret it. Because for me, being the enthusiast that I am, I'm younger in the Porsche scene, but love it. And I can go on Rennlist and learn and read and Google. But I really love a morning where I can open 000 and flip through the photos and find a photo that catches me and then do a deep dive on a car or something and walk away with it with a knowledge of maybe I could have found it on Google or Rennsport, but it's written about in a way of love. Like I remember reading about the 982 Evo motor in the GT4 and the Spider. And it just felt so fun to learn about that because it was like, here's the technical information on it, but here's how we experienced it out in the real world. And here's why it's special. And I really loved that. So I think that it's for the enthusiasts that want this slightly deeper dive with a curated artistic feel.
Well, you're going for an experience and, your background in music and touring with bands, which for me, when I was looking at getting into music as a profession, that was the high bar, was doing something, live performance, tours, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, what were you doing? You were creating, an hour or 3-hour concert for people to enjoy. And your goal was to make that an enjoyable, seamless experience for the audience.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing here. And we take it really seriously. That little 982 Evo, that was a smaller piece for 000, and that it made an impression on you means a lot to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't take so long to read, but I can tell you there were many, many hours that went into creating that piece. And about 15 people read most things.
Yeah.
I typically will read something 7 times. Right now, I'm leaning more and more on the team.
Gosh.
But we're really, I'll read everything backwards by paragraph before hitting go.
Yeah.
It's
a lot.
That's the time you take. But it's every industry that cares has this.
Yeah.
Whether it's music and a concert or a stage, if a ladder comes clanging in from the side of the theme, when you're at the theater, the game is over. If the proscenium arch is violated, not purposely, you're no longer in the suspension of disbelief and you're not in that experience any longer.
Right.
And so the goal of 000 or any good magazine is to give you an escape and to create a fun, seamless experience. And so that was a big goal of ours.
Well, talk to me about the whole state of mind thing, right? Because even past it being a magazine, there is a little bit more of it. And I know you've said that. So like when you say 000 is a state of mind, what do you mean by that?
Well, so that was early on. You start to go one direction, and then you find in a small business typically that there's a pivot that comes. There's almost no entrepreneur, almost no founder that will say, "Yep, we did this, and then we had it exactly right from the start."
Hmm.
You have to go and take the chance, and then you see what you learn if you're paying attention.
Love that.
And what we learned quickly was that the little logo, which we needed a name. The concept was there. We didn't have a name. And that logo was sketched out on a piece of cheap laser printer paper with a cheap Bic pen. And the underline was later added in Microsoft Word.
Let's go. Let's
Just
go.
for organizational documents. And later this was refined. We tried a lot of things, and ultimately that's what became the logo. And what we found was people wanted it on their cars, and they wanted it on a hat, and they wanted it. There was something that resonated with people. And so what we quickly saw is 000 is a state of mind. There's a group within Porsche enthusiasts who want to go deeper with the story. They like me, they've heard a lot of the same stories over and over. They wonder, is there more to that story? Is that story right?
Yeah.
Has that story been told correctly through the ages? Is it a little bit like the game of telephone?
Yeah.
And so what we've found is there was a community there. It was a quieter community, perhaps not organized per se, but like Alex and I, as fellow readers of Car and Driver and Road and Track, once we connected in real life, we could connect out of those shared stories. So 000, there's a community aspect, and then there's also a state of mind element in terms of we started doing things that we never imagined when we started the project, like Rare Shades events around color. And that was really Alex's baby. That was really his thought. Long before the current obsession with paint to sample, as that was starting to grow. But really, Rare Shades isn't about paint to sample. Rare Shades is about unusual Porsche colors through time, of which there are many.
Mm-hmm.
Pikes Peak was another. COVID came along, the pandemic came, and we couldn't hold Rare Shades events, which for us was a way to meet with the community and reach out to people and connect people. And suddenly we couldn't. So we did a Rare Shades livery, a wrap for a race car that was just for a photo shoot. And, we roped Larry Chen in, who's a friend of the magazine, and he's Larry Chen. He's amazing.
Yeah.
And some partners at Champion Porsche, who have always been super supportive and obviously an icon in racing in North America. And a couple of others, Michelin and Chopard and McGuire's. And we, as this tiny little company, rented the mountain, Pikes Peak because it was available, because they couldn't race during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And out of that simple trip to go get a photo on Pikes Peak with that car in a funny wrap, grew a race car program, as well as a package for the 718 Spider. So this is when I say state of mind. It started as a conversation. 000 really started as a conversation to see, could we do a higher conversation with our readers?
Mm-hmm.
Could we do a higher conversation with Porsche? Could we create a periodical, something that's physical, that reflects the quality of its subject matter? That was a critical point. And where that conversation has led are to ideas that really weren't there in 2016.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot. Like, we have this bulleted list here where we kind of wanted to cover a couple of things, and I think you kind of went through a couple of those that I wanted to touch on so well. I mean, it's interesting, right? It starts to make sense. 000 is a state of mind. Cool. So I think that there's something to the idea of, like, you clearly worked at other magazines, you experienced that. And then this is finally your thing of, like, what can we do if there was no reservation? Like, how do we make the best thing? I think in this day and age, that's so important. Like, I think that there's a market for everything, but to take that space and say, hey, we're making the best thing, right? And then here's the S version of it. And here's even crazier ways to package it and even crazier subscriptions. But, like, just saying, hey, this is premium. It's the best thing we can make. Do you want it? And it's so encouraging to see that people do want the best thing. I love that. I love that you explain that. But then I start to understand even further than just that, this state of mind. Because if you take that state of mind of if you take the stops away, you take the reservations away, and you make the best thing and you make the thing you're passionate about, then what's that become? Because it's a lot more than a magazine. So you touched on Pikes Peak. That was such a cool moment. It kind of happened out of this accidental necessity thing. That then went on a little bit further as well, right? You then, that went to a Turbo S, right? A 992 Turbo S.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, Alex and I, that friendship, we're very yin and yang
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. If you meet the two of us, you think, okay, what's the connection here between these two?
Yeah.
And the connection is cars. The connection is this shared love of Anoraki, goofy details, and you know, all the what I guess I'll call useless pub trivia.
Yeah. There you go.
And so, you know, we're united in that. And I think what has been great is we can have very different ideas, but we give each other the space. And with Pikes Peak, you know, after the photo shoot came the joke with Donner, and then that turned into a race program with 3 weeks before the race to find the money in pandemic times to put that car on the hill.
Yeah.
And then he won.
Yeah.
And then Alex said, great, we're all done with this. We'll never do it again. You know, underdog story, Cinderella story, incredible.
Yeah.
You know, David Donner delivers in 3 weeks with a car that had never been raced. It was quite an upset victory.
Yeah.
Class win and third overall with a steel-bodied 911 against race cars with big wings and built only to race at Pikes Peak.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no development possible. It was basically a wrap, a front spoiler lip that was factory. So every part of the car was factory.
Yeah.
And the car just was entered and it won.
Yeah.
And so Alex
really good
was like, great,
tires.
we're done.
Yeah.
With some really good tires.
Yeah.
Although that, and there's a backstory there. Mike Lewis at Michelin USA made that possible. And I can tell you that was tricky. We had to figure out how to get certain compounds into the country with 3 weeks to go that weren't available in the US.
Wow.
And there was a lot of, we ended up working with a friend of ours in Belgium to get tires air-shipped into Donner. So we only had 3 weeks.
No way.
And Mike Lewis at Michelin USA was remarkably resourceful to help us figure out how to do it.
Was it a Cup
budget
2R?
that we could make it work? No, so that was the 2020 car. So those were slicks.
Oh, I get it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so the GT2RS Club Sport was on slicks, but the slicks that the car was photographed with were much too hard for Pikes Peak for the race, for the hill climb. And so ironically, the slicks we thought we wanted, which weren't available in the US, that we did all the work for, turned out to be too soft for the race.
Funny.
But the kind of funny thing with the whole win was I looked at Donner and said, this was amazing. Do you want to do it again? And Donner said, yeah, I would do this again with you guys, but not the same thing. I want to do something else.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned it to Alex, and Alex was like, nope, like we did it. It's over. We're never doing that again.
Yeah.
And let's wait. And so then 2022 rolled along, and we kind of had this idea for, well, really in 2021 to go back with a street car.
There you go.
And the unspoken goal was to be the first street car under 10 minutes at Pikes Peak, which is a pretty wild goal for a street car. The 2020 race car that won its class, the 000 car did a 936 and change, but that's a full race car.
Yeah.
And so we started to say, could a 992 Turbo S lightweight get under 10 minutes, like a 959 or lower?
Yeah.
But we certainly didn't say it out loud. And Alex was like, this is pointless. And like, what are we doing here? And I was like, but the beauty of our friendship and our business working relationship is that we'll be able to put up I think that's a bad idea, but I'll let you have the space to go explore it.
Yeah.
And that's really worked well for 000. And Donner and I continued to work on that. Champion said, okay, we'll help you prepare the car. And ultimately we shot for under 10 minutes. What we didn't expect was the weather to change race week. We were on target, and we knew we could get under 10 minutes. The car was shockingly fast on the hill for stock suspension, stock brakes, stock aero, stock transmission, stock driveline.
Oh, yeah.
The production car rules at Pikes Peak are quite strict.
Yeah.
And then the weather came in. And with the weather, came an opportunity we didn't anticipate. The car won its class against prototype race cars, and in fact beat every race car on the hill except for one prototype, one pure Pikes Peak special.
Insane.
But we didn't get under
time?
10 minutes.
What was it?
I I'd have to go back and look at the time,
Yeah.
but it was a 10. I think it was a 10:23
Does that leave you
in the
wanting more?
rain. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, the whole team,
Yeah.
we were elated. We were elated. I mean, there were 911s there that were pure race cars with two new turbos for every day of the week, with much more power and much less weight. And this
Yeah.
simple street legal 992 Turbo F built to
Yeah.
the rules
Yeah.
beat everything
Yeah.
except for one race car.
Insane.
But our goal, we did feel a little, the weather meant we couldn't get under 10 minutes, which was really the goal.
Yeah.
And that was inspired by Monster Tajima. I don't know if you are familiar with Monster Tajima, but he was the first person to go under 10 minutes at Pikes Peak on the course historically in a 910 horsepower Suzuki. And so it gives you an idea how hard. Now, the course back then was partly dirt,
Yeah.
and now it's all paved.
Yeah.
But still, it gives you an idea how hard this goal was.
Yeah.
And so we went back in the fall and working with the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, the team there, we set a certified course time of 9 minutes and 53 seconds. So the car proved that it could go under 10 minutes, and it became the first street car to do so. So
let's go.
These are things that, I should say it's not 2016, but 2017 that we launched this. And I would say these were things we never planned on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, again, I love coming back to this through line of 000 as a state of mind, because getting a 992 Turbo S under 10 minutes on Pikes Peak has absolutely nothing to do with a magazine. Like, maybe one story, but like, it's so far past that. And then, even another point that we didn't touch on, but it's funny because I believe the inception of this idea happened at Pikes Peak when you were shooting the GT2, but you built a 000 package, which was a Porsche offered OEM CXX option, which I don't know. I would have to go super deep to see if it's ever been done before with like an outside party, but it's certainly extremely rare. But talk to me about that, because I think that fits into this whole state of mind thing too. And it was so beautifully executed.
Well, the state of mind is doing things differently and going, pursuing ideas that sometimes are a little crazy.
Yeah.
And in that case, this whole photo shoot was crazy. I mean, it was a kind of the worst moment in the pandemic here in the US, or one of the worst moments. It was in June of 2020.
Rough.
And so obviously
right
all the groundwork was being laid in April and May, March, April, May.
Yeah.
And we knew we needed to still produce a cover, and we had to do it at a time when no one really knew how COVID was transmitted. Was it airborne? Was it by touch? Like, how is this?
Right.
Testing
very
was
uncertain times.
Yeah. Testing was even fairly nascent. And so I got in a car, I got in a 911 and drove down to Alex's in LA. I'm in San Francisco. He's in LA. And he and he had me tested on his porch before I could come in the house. And I didn't have a backup plan. If I tested positive, I was going to, I guess, have to drive back to San Francisco the same day, because you couldn't get a hotel.
Right, yeah.
And so not really. And if you could, you might not want to stay there. Mm-hmm. And so, we ended up the next morning, we drove to Colorado in one movement, thanks to a press car from Frank and Luke at PCNA, a 718 Spider. And we wanted to do a story on the 718 Spider and 718 GT4. And they were kind to say, why don't you take those to Colorado? We like road trip stories. And so Larry Chen and Louis Yao were in one car, and Alex and I were in the other. And we were in the Spider on the way out to Colorado. And we decided to do one switch for the week due to not knowing about germs and what that looked like.
Right.
So a couple of dudes in each car for, long periods of time. And somewhere in the middle of Utah, I just realized I didn't know how much I needed to be in the middle of nowhere. I've been cooped up in a house in California for months, effectively. And we were in the middle of nowhere, Utah. There was almost no traffic, very few, even trucks were, it seemed to be less.
Yeah.
And we got to talking, and we thought this 718 Spider is kind of the most alluring car Porsche offers right now for us, like what we're interested in. We love the car. And it was so good out there for a long road trip.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you say, well, how would you configure yours? And both of us are not huge Alcantara people.
Yeah.
So I sent a text to a friend in Germany, Boris Oppenbrinket exclusive, and said, "Hey, could your department get rid of all this Alcantara if a customer wanted that?" And he wrote back and he said, "Yes." He's like, "And what would you think about doing a package, a 000 package?" I can't remember exactly how he phrased it.
Yeah.
And I thought, I would have never even considered such a thing as a possibility.
Yeah.
And so that led to a lot of Teams calls in the time of COVID. No one got on a plane. No one could go anywhere. And I kept waiting for those calls to end with, "Hey, it's been a nice thing, but we can't do it." And in the end, it ended with, "You can communicate this to your readers."
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. And it was a package that was offered worldwide. And it was
Yeah.
really a fun collaboration. And I learned a great deal of just how hard it is to do these things. People think it's easy, and it
Yeah.
really isn't. And I gained a great deal of respect and admiration for the people who make these dreams and these cars come to life for customers. What we
Yeah.
think seemingly are simple requests are a whole, it's kind of like the theater. You go to the show and you think,
Yeah.
"Wow,
Yeah.
that's 2 hours." Well, there's been many weeks, months, years of work that went into the 2 hours you enjoy.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun to see the backstory of how these cars are made for individualized builds.
Yeah. Well,
So
I love what I love about it. Again, coming back to that state of mind thing is like, well, state of mind, but just like people who care. Yeah, so sweet. It started with the idea of could it be all leather? But then the colors chosen are very historical nods to like very, very important eras of Porsche, and the small details, all in all, in that car, bring it together to be a really beautiful piece. And we should jump to another part of this talk, but we maybe come back to it because it's even inspired a little bit of a project that you and I are now talking about, just off of
right.
caring about every little detail and the little things that matter. So
Yeah.
I want to talk
Okay.
about something else here. So we kind of went all over the place in our structure, but I like it. We talked about 000. We talked about how it started. We talked about the state of mind. That's a real deep dive. So it's time for us to zoom out now. So
Okay.
the next thing to talk about, and I'm actually really excited for this dynamic because I haven't been to Rennsport. So I would love for my friend to explain
Ah,
it to me. But before we even get to that, let's talk briefly about the brand Porsche. And let's talk about that from a place of you and I are really, really, really deep nerds, but maybe zooming out and kind of just like on a little bit more of a level of somebody just checking this out that doesn't go super deep, like the history of Porsche and why you think it is the brand that it is today. And then I want to talk about Rennsport.
well, I think the more I've studied this brand, the people who care, as you put it, is related to the state of mind idea. People who care is something that stands out to me.
Yeah.
The other thing that stands out to me through time, because I've met so many of them, by documenting this brand and this marque, I like to call it a marque, really. But getting to know Porsche as a kid who used to ride a bicycle to a smoke shop to read about Porsche in Berkeley in
Yeah.
magazines. I
Yeah.
would, little kid, I'd ride my bike to Berkeley just to read car magazines and buy one or two that I could afford.
Was it
So to
always
get to
cool? Was Porsche always cool?
well, no, yes and no, yes and no. It wasn't as well known as it is now. I mean, back then it was really a pretty arcane niche. Even here in the San Francisco Bay Area,
Yeah.
they were around. I mean, the Bay Area has always been interested in well handling, unique cars. The Bay Area has always been, but LA too. I mean, California. Talk about state of mind.
Yeah.
Porsche, like if you think about a 356 and you think about the 50s or 60s as they
Right.
became more popular in LA, really with the Speedster,
Yeah.
it was a not so quiet way of saying I do things differently. Everybody else was driving around in big, heavy cars that changed every year with an engine in the front and a big V8.
Yeah.
And here were people who were driving a tiny little car that cost as much as a Corvette or a big Jag with more cylinders and more engine.
Yeah.
And they were doing it with a car with an engine in the back.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit
It,
counterculture.
it's a very contrarian vehicle if you really think about it. It's
Yes.
pretty punk rock because it's always been a luxury brand. It's not like anybody can just get into one. Granted, vintage Porsche tax is crazy right now. But it is funny to think about that, right? Like if you were buying a 356, you were making a choice and you were making a statement. However, it's a quiet statement. Like it's not
Yeah.
because it's not a Ferrari, it's not a
Right.
Lamborghini, because that was another
Right.
statement. And
Which
that's
gets into,
interesting that you've watched that evolution, that you were drawn to that
well,
very tasteful, contrarian, those who know type thing. It's just I'm curious of how you found that.
it's been a phenomenal and completely unintended life lesson. And I
Mm.
found it through a 914. That was my
Mm.
first car that I've kept all these years.
Yeah.
But I found it, and the contrarian lesson was more from less. For me, it was people who were focused, who cared and were focused on getting more from less. They recognized that more isn't always more. And so while most were driving big cars with big engines or 6 or 8 cylinders and so forth, they were getting more for their money.
Yeah.
Were they? There were
Yeah.
a certain group of people who were saying, nope, I like less and I can do
Yeah.
more with it.
Oh.
And so that's a state of mind that has been instructional for me in life. And it's altered my appreciation in terms of architecture, in terms of possessions, in terms of consumption,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what matters in life. It's
Yeah.
been an odd thing that there's a purity and a timelessness. And so I would say the contrarian nature of the 356 and the 50s and 60s, time has come. That Porsche is particularly well suited in a lot of the discussions of today regarding what are we doing with our resources. And if you think about these cars, what's interesting to me as well as a state of mind is look at the percentage of these cars that are still on the road, look at how they're valued. But what I love the most is there's still a place for people. You say the vintage Porsche tax is high, and that's true now for 356s and 911s and 912s and even 914s like I grew up in. When I was driving a 914, it was the butt of many jokes
Oh,
at my high school,
totally. Yeah.
and it
And
was
even
actually, yeah.
944s as well. I remember for me growing up with like 90s tuner cars, if you were like a 944 was almost like you couldn't get a 240 SX. Or it's like, oh, it's slower than a 240 SX. Why would you get that? It looks the same, but the 240 is better. Like there was a time where it was not what it is right now. Anyway, continue.
Well, but what I find fascinating with this, Mark, is there still are places for a high school kid who was in the place I was,
Yeah.
which is there's still 986 Boxsters out there. They might be rough
Yeah.
around the edges. My 914 was rough around the edges,
Yeah.
but those cars can still be had for 4 figures. They're out
Yeah.
there if you look for them.
Yeah.
And then if you're creative, I worked at Costco wholesale and I perused junkyards nights and weekends for
Yeah.
parts for that 914. And so I just continually improved the car with the parts I could afford, which were used parts.
Right.
And I would go harvest a short shift kit out of a wrecked 914.
Yeah.
And then I literally would install those parts during my lunch break at Costco.
Yeah.
And, that short shifter is still in that car all these years later. There's still pathways for people who are really serious about it into this marque.
Yeah.
And those pathways are quite remarkable. That 914 led to a drive in a 917K with that 914 for 000 for issue 14. So
Man,
the cover story of that is Carrera GT.
You just said something so important. So important. Because as you explained that, I realized that was my journey as well. And what is actually so beautiful about Porsche as a brand is it's an extremely aspirational brand for those who know. But my first Porsche was a 987-2 Cayman base. And I got it before COVID. It was not a cheap car, but it was certainly in comparison to other Porsches accessible. And that accessible Porsche, the equivalent of a 986 Boxster, or, whatever, like your first Porsche, it was a lot of money for me to spend. It meant the world to me, but it then put me into a community. It brought me into a thing that I loved so much and that I read about so much. And just by owning that car, I would then drive to meets and I would find the people that I align with. There's a couple people that are too cool for school and they're old and blah, blah, blah. I remember pulling up to one of my first Porsche meets. I parked next to a Cayman R and I said, they're just like each other. And the guy said, yeah, you wish. And I was like, I'll remember you forever. I hate you. And like, there's those rotten eggs of people everywhere. But that's the very, very outlier case, right? The other side of it and the 95% see me in my base Cayman and they're like, dude, that's so sick. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the family. And I make these friends. And then that has led me to flying across the world by invite from Porsche to go experience these things and to be a part of this brand and this community. And all of a sudden, it's not what Porsche you drive. It's just like, oh, cool, you get it. You're a part of this. So it's like outside of any specific car, this state of mind of Porsche, this community, your 914 led you to driving in a 917, right? My 987 led me to driving in every GT car I can dream of. And it's like, had I not bought that car, I don't think that would have happened. And I don't think that it's you have to own a Porsche to be a part of it. But I do think that once you're in that community and you understand it, you can understand that through the ownership of truly any vehicle. And that's a cool way to summarize Porsche, in my opinion.
Absolutely. It's a conversation. It's both a conversation starter with total strangers sometimes, and then it's also a conversation starter with total strangers who lead to further conversations. And then I kind of see it's an overall conversation, which gets back to the state of mind idea.
Yeah.
But it's the if I think about the arc of the conversation begun with that 914, that was, at most a $3,000 car with a kicked-in door and a shattered taillight, and it needed a clutch. And the deal was, if you can fix it and afford to pay for the gas and repairs, you can drive it, and insurance.
Yeah.
So hence I worked nights at Toys R Us and Costco, and worked some more to fix it and run it and piece it together. There are ways to do it, not easy, but there are, but attainable. And I still think those opportunities exist out there.
I agree.
I think that that's still real. And
I would say that
you end up
almost better. I mean, shoot, a flat 6 out of a 986, like that's not nothing. That's a really fun car for 4 figures. Granted, you're going to have to work and you're going to have to learn a lot about air oil separators and the mid 2000s and pieces that just need to be fixed. But every generation has it. But when you earn that experience of a manual transmission flat 6 motor behind you, that ain't bad for that.
No, years later, my wife and I ended up splitting a Boxster when we lived in downtown San Francisco. It was a base car, a 986 2.5. And it was wonderful. And my brother still has that car. He now has 200. He had the 914 before me. So 914's 265,000 miles, best we can tell. And that Boxster is still in the family, still on the original engine, 235,000 miles. And what has been interesting to me is I spent a week with a Carrera GT and spent a week with a 918 and spent quite a while with an RS 4-liter and drove a 917 and all these crazy things, right? What's been one of the biggest and most gratifying surprises in this 25-year conversation and time around extraordinary engineers, Maurice van de Weerd and Georg Wall, and we could go on and on and on with great engineers and racers and Donahue and Hurley Haywood was a mentor, and all these experiences and all the cars and all the racetracks over 25 years. One of the most gratifying things has been to find that a 986 2.5 is very high on the list for overall fun factor.
Yeah. That
certain base cars through time, none of them are bad. I mean, we're talking about Porsches here.
Yeah.
But it's what's been one of the most gratifying things is that many of the peak cars that we dream about, the Carrera GT, the RS 4-liter, and so forth, these cars pay off. Many of them are the dreams we think they are to drive. But one of the most gratifying things is how often the simplest and most basic specifications, you see that love. You see that people cared in Weissach. You see that they really made them fun. And I'll submit, after all the cars, many of them with 2 commas in them now, the prices are quite high. A 986 2.5 ranks very high on my list of most fun to drive if fun is the measure. And I think fun should be the measure. It's a
Yeah.
sports car.
I think that when you talk to the people that work at Porsche and you encompass what the brand is, fun is the measure. And I think the plot gets lost sometimes with other people. It's great. They made a great product. People love to talk about them and they get expensive, but fun being the measure, I think it's still very accessible. Okay, we talked about Porsche as a brand. Let's talk about Rennsport. This is crazy. So 000 has had a presence at Rennsport before. It will have a presence at this one. But let's zoom out and tell me, because this is so fun. I've never been, and you're my friend, and you've experienced it, and we're about to be able to do something really cool together there. But what should I expect? What is Rennsport? How do you explain Rennsport?
Well, in one word, it's family. One word, I would say it's family. It's another, though, be ready. It can be overwhelming. Rennsport 4 or 5, I think it was 5. I felt a little overwhelmed, and I'd been to every one of them. The first one at Lime Rock was tiny and was family in a different sense. It was family in that I think there were more participants than spectators at Lime Rock.
Wow.
And that was really a sort of a dream of Bob Carlson, the former
When was
PR.
the first one?
2001 was the first one at Lime Rock.
So it's not that old, like
no,
20-ish years.
Yeah, and its roots come out of the Double 50, which was a 50th anniversary celebration with Brian Redman, organized by Brian Redman with Bob Carlson's support. And then came kind of this dream of Bob Carlson's and some others to create an event just for Porsche, Porsche's history, to celebrate the history. Bob really loved the legends of racing, and so Bob would dig up these racers that nobody had heard from for years.
Yeah,
and he would make them instructors for journalists and media at press events. And it was actually really kind of a beautiful thing because it resurrected and respected those racers, but it also carried on their gifts, and it made for better media and safer media in Porsche press cars because you were getting this invaluable education from Case Nierop and Hurley Haywood and Doc Bundy.
Right, the people
David
that
Donahue,
learned how to drive these at their limit and like
Patrick
really
Long.
could educate. Yeah.
Right. And so for 10 years, these were educators, but Rennsport was out of that love of these former racers and this heritage of racing. Bob was a racer himself before he went into journalism, before Al Holbert, the late Al Holbert, who was the president of Porsche Motorsport North America, hired him as a PR manager. And eventually Bob ran PR for North America for the production, for everything. And so the first Rennsport was a celebration of Porsche racing cars and drivers at Lime Rock. It was tiny. And then it moved to Daytona for 2 Rennsports in a row. And it had more audience, but still pretty light on the audience, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 spectators for those 2 years.
Yeah.
And the goal was every 3-ish years, Rennsport would happen. So not every year where it would become expected, but not too many years between. And there were questions of whether it would continue after the first 2 at Daytona. And I went to those, and they were great because Daytona's Daytona.
Yeah.
But then Rennsport Reunion 4 was held at Laguna Seca, and it found its home. It went from, let's say, 3,000 or 4,000 spectators to 27,000 spectators.
Oh, wow.
So it was a big leap to come to Laguna. And I can only describe the feeling in that paddock as a different sort of family. It felt like a family room, Andrew. It was electric. The feeling in the paddock when it came to Laguna was absolutely electric. And it's been that way since. It's grown and grown. And so I think it went from something like 27,000 spectators or 29,000 spectators to 55,000 spectators, to then 75,000 or 80,000 spectators. This year, they're expecting 100,000 spectators at Laguna Seca.
Gosh.
So this word overwhelming, prepare yourself.
Yeah.
I became overwhelmed a Rennsport or 2 ago. And what I found helped was to get involved in some way, to have a job. If I was doing something, then I felt like I was contributing. And I
Sure.
felt like the soundboard operator again. Didn't
Yeah.
matter if I was
Yeah.
cleaning a wheel or doing something. I was fortunate to race the 1951 356 last time, which I can tell you
Sick.
was a job.
Yeah.
Uh, it's the hardest I've ever worked to go so slow on a racetrack. I think my top trap speed that I saw was 63 miles per hour.
Let's
I've
go.
raced in a few Rennsport reunions now. This was
Hmm.
by far the slowest car,
Yeah.
but it was also really special to connect with what Herbert Linge and all von Frankenberg and all these early drivers must have felt in a
Yeah.
pre-A 356 while racing.
Yeah.
No synchro mesh,
Yeah.
38 horsepower on a big track like Laguna. But it
Hmm.
was, I really encourage people as they go to Rennsport, the ones you might think about, is there something you can volunteer with? It could be anything. It really adds to the experience and gives you something that grounds you, because be ready, Andrew. I know you'll have jobs there, but it's good to have a role.
Yeah.
Or I also found myself envying the newcomer. The last couple times I've been to Rennsport, I was almost overwhelmed because I've been studying for as long as I've been studying, and I'm
Yeah.
still a student. And I
Yeah.
felt a little overwhelmed. I was like, whoa, there's so much I need to learn here. I
Yeah.
kind of started to envy the bliss of being the new total newcomer and just experiencing it as it comes, like maybe not knowing what you're looking at entirely. Because if you know a little bit about what you're looking at Rennsport, it can be overwhelming. There's too many incredible cars, too many incredible stories, and it can
Right.
be almost bewildering.
So to just come in as a new person and see it all and say, wow, this is awesome, so much is happening, is maybe even like a more beautiful place to approach it from.
Maybe. And unfortunately, I don't get to know that now,
Yeah.
but
Well,
that's
I guess I get
okay.
to tell you, right? So, because I'm so glad you explained that, because I have a couple thoughts now. One, I missed the plot entirely. Like, of course, it's Porsche, it's family, I'll go no matter what. But you were explaining this to me and it made me Google something. But you're talking about these drivers and you're talking about press learning and you're talking about like watching these cars run. And I Googled the translation of Rennsport from German to English, and it's racing or motor racing. And
Mhm.
it's such a no-brainer. It's funny that I'm saying this, but maybe what makes Rennsport special, and I was just ready to go to a car meet. I was ready to go to like, oh, cool, I'm going to see a bunch of people, a bunch of rare cars will be there. It'll be great. Maybe the biggest thing that I missed here is that this is an event centered around racing and driving these cars and having iconic drivers be there and telling stories through the track, which is something that, again, comes back to Porsche as a brand. It's a performance brand. All of these cars perform, but it's kind of funny. I'm kind of laughing about it in my head. Like, that to me is the differentiating thing that I'm going to look out for is we're at Laguna Seca. Like, this is a racetrack, and the amount of racing that we will see there and the amount of stories in the cars that will be run that you probably don't get to see run, that's more than looking at the cars parked on a concourse, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's to hear, I will never forget. I think it was Rennsport Reunion 5.
Yeah.
And I believe it was Sven Lennep was in the Sandeman 917K.
Mm.
And nobody, I mean, Bruce Canup is quick around Laguna Seca in the 917. No
Mm.
holds barred. That guy
Mm.
goes, whether he's in a 935 or a 917, whatever. But I have never heard any 917 over the top of turn one on the way down to turn two like Sven Lennep in that car. And you could just hear his throttle angle
Yeah.
in that thing. And it was
Yeah.
full send
Yeah.
by one of the drivers who drove those in period at Laguna. And you got to hear it go over that hill. And
Wow.
it just sounded different. The car just
Yeah.
sounded, it was that wide open throttle. And there was a fierceness because when you go over the rise
Right.
on the way down to turn two, which I've done, it
Yeah.
actually took Case Nierop to talk me through keeping the gas pedal flat to the floor in
Yeah.
somebody else's historic RSR. I was in a Fotoquella 74 RSR. And
Yeah.
I came back in after some practice and said, Case, one of my former teachers, thanks to Bob Carlson, I said, Case, this is Jim's car, a friend Jim Edwards' car. It's a historic car. It's a Max Moritz RSR. I'm not comfortable going over a blind hill with, flat out, foot
Yeah.
flat to the
Without
floor.
lifting. Yeah.
And Case translated straight in and just said, you're scared that you're not going to have enough time to get down to the gear you need for turn two. You're not going to get brake down and geared down for turn two. He said, you got plenty of time. You'll be okay. Next time out, flat to the floor over the hill. And it mattered for the rest of the weekend.
Yeah.
So but to hear somebody in a $20 million 917,
Yeah.
at the time it
Flat
might
out.
not have been 20 million yet, but to hear one of the people who drove the car in period
Yeah.
with that bravery in that car over that hill was totally incredible. And that's just
Right.
one moment. It's just
Yeah.
one tiny slice
So we
of what
should be
happens that
looking
weekend.
like we should embrace racing though. Like I think that that's a huge differentiating point. It talks about the brand. It talks about everything we talked about is like this event, Rennsport, is not just a car meet. It's to celebrate racing. And you're going to see a lot of stories and a lot of cars that have a very cool background racing there.
Well, and you're going to see juxtapositions that you just can't see anywhere else. So for years and years, I pursued a story with a 962 and the 9R6 RS Spider, the LMP2 car together, because Dyson was a family racing team and they had both. They raced both in period. And so we did a lot of work and we did do a photo shoot with those two cars.
Yeah.
But the Dyson 962 showed up on old tires and so forth. And so he couldn't really go. Chris Dyson drove them both and gave some impressions. But a lot of these cars are museum cars and they don't get out much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the last Rennsport, maybe it was 2 ago, Mark Hotchkiss was out in his family's Wins 962, which was like a NASA spaceship in terms of preparation. It was just an incredible, it was a California hot rodded 962 in many ways.
Yeah.
Like the front end would come off as all gold anodized, everything. And it was turned out to a Penske level. And a Penske level is very high.
Yeah.
Well, Gunnar Jeanette was out there in an LMP2 RS Spider, and Mark Hotchkiss knows how to drive. And Mark Hotchkiss, by the way, his day job is at PECLA. And he's just, if you ever get a chance, go find Mark Hotchkiss and hang out with him. He's wonderful. He's so down to earth, so approachable. So here was a 962 and an RS Spider going at it. The RS Spider had the advantage in technology and aero and tires and brakes, but the 962, that old turbo flat six, is just an incredible machine. Yeah. And those two were going at it in class. Now, when I was out there, I was in a 51 356. And I thought, well, this won't be so bad because my run group is all 4 cylinders for the most part. Well, I learned that a 904 is like a 919 Evo compared to a 51 356. Yeah. And so as fans, you get to watch this. You get to watch these juxtapositions that, because it's all Porsche, each of these classes, they can't just do infinite classes. So you start to see races within the races, and you start to see juxtapositions. Now, most people are obviously caring for these cars, and that would also have been something Bob would have loved. This reunion part you talk about, it's for the cars, it's for the drivers, it's for the fans. Yeah. It's a reunion, and it's a celebration. But there is some competitive driving out there up to a certain level. Yeah. And you don't get to see these cars exercised like that very often, and certainly not together.
That's great. That's beautiful. So the last piece that I want to talk about is 000 Magazine's presence at Rennsport, because this is something you and I have been working very closely on and something I'm really excited about. I don't know how much we can share, or maybe we just edit, whatever. But what comes to my mind and what I want to have people understand if they hear about it is 000 is going to have a booth there. It's not going to be in a VIP area. It's going to be accessible to everybody. As much as 000's state of mind is this thing of like, how can it be the best? And what if these restrictions were gone? It's always supposed to be very approachable. I think that we're going to have a very unique booth set up there. Very different from what others might be doing. And I think that we might be bringing in a nod to that 718 Spider 000 package that you built. What do we share about that? I mean, I just like the idea and the challenge to make such a welcoming space and to tell the story of 000 and have everybody that's at Rennsport come kick it with us and be a part of it and enjoy it. I think is something so special and important to both of us. What do you think? How much do we share?
Well, I think we can share some things. Look, I'm fired up about Rennsport Reunion this year. I'm so excited to be involved with Race Service and Michelin and Dernica and partners that we're doing this booth with. Yeah, the idea for this year's booth really comes out of the last Rennsport Reunion booth, which was a 20 by 40 space. I guess we're getting down into the weeds with that, but the the idea there was we looked at Rennsport coming and we thought, you know, there's a lot of people who aren't a VIP, who are
Yeah.
new to this experience, who don't know, wouldn't even know where to look into getting VIP tickets. They just
Right.
wouldn't even think to do it.
Yeah.
And I remember people making space for me when I was that kid driving a 914 that wasn't a 911, that wasn't the cool car,
Yes.
I was just a kid at the junkyard picking out parts to keep the thing on the road
Yeah.
with the money I had to spend.
Yeah.
And I was a newcomer. And so we kind of thought, okay, how do we make a space where people might just want to get out of the sun? Or also, you know, it's really, back then it was really hard for us to describe what we were doing with 000. We didn't have it all figured out. I'm not saying we do now, but we like that about it. We like that it's a little malleable. But we thought, let's have a place where people can read it. And let's have a place where people can sit down on a comfortable couch for a minute and get out of the sun, which is a pretty rare thing at a racetrack if you don't have a lounge pass.
Yeah.
And so we rented some nice leather couches and we built out sort of a space where people could hang out and we could talk about magazines or just talk about Porsches. And so we decided it was really popular. So we decided we're going to do that again.
Yeah.
And the 000 booth will be sort of a place where people can meet the editors, meet people involved, creators, and or other enthusiasts, and just hang out for a second, get out of the sun, take a seat, maybe enjoy a conversation. I think that's really a critical part of this. So our goal is to make it a welcoming space, which is also important for us because people tend to think, oh, 000 is kind of expensive, isn't it, for a magazine? And it is for sure. But so are the cars, and so are a lot of things around the cars. The magazine isn't so expensive when you look at, say, a night out or a good lunch or a good dinner even.
Yeah.
So our view is we don't want that to be an impediment for people. You don't have to subscribe to come hang out.
Yeah.
And maybe you're buying a sticker for your window just to say, hey, I'm part of this state of mind. Or maybe you're buying a hat, or maybe you're buying one back issue to see if the deep dive is for you.
Yeah.
Or you just want to come and say hi.
Yeah.
So, we will have a 000 package spider in the booth. And we will also have a certain race car that went under 10 minutes at Pikes Peak in the booth. So there'll be stories to tell there. And that livery, the rap people who put it on the car, and David Donner and Tom Pilov at Champion, everybody tried to prepare me before I saw it in person that it was wild. And I thought, yeah, I've been staring at it on a computer screen for a while. Big deal. And then I saw it. And I couldn't believe it because it's supersized magazine printing, but our print partner Hemlock created files so large that the wrap installer said, I've never seen resolution like this. And I couldn't find a pixel. Like in the photos, in the text, I couldn't find a pixel.
Yeah.
So it's a wild piece to look at if you know what you're looking at. Yeah. And what I'm excited for is to see kids. I can't wait for kids to see this goofy race car.
Yeah.
Which is really just a street car.
Yeah.
And to interact with the newcomers as well as the long timers, that's exciting to me.
Yeah. And to add to that, like on the side of race service, working with you on this, like I understood that assignment. We talked and that was like the mission statement. And what I want to collaborate with and to bring to that as well is, maybe I'll just say it and we can choose to share this or not. It's not like it's live. But how do we make it so approachable? How do you make it so somebody comes and sits down and can open up a magazine, not only read about it, but talk to a you or talk to an Alex and learn about every bit of the magazine and why it's special and get that chance to preview it? But in addition, how do we make something memorable, and how do we make a piece or pieces that are exclusive to Rennsport and that celebrate it? So talking about the 718 Spider, talking about Modernica, being able to make a collab chair is something that they do with only brands that they co-sign. There have been huge brands that they've turned away. So not only taking an inspiration of more of a mid-century theme and making it like an approachable, like kick-it lounge, making general admission feel more VIP than VIPs. But then when you come into that booth, you can see something that we've been working on where I think it'll be like a pre-order, like we'll have the prototypes there, but then people can see them in person next to the Spider, the car, and be able to get a very, very limited collab chair with Modernica and Triple Zero. Huge piece there. Very excited about that. And then also, Michelin being such a great partner in all of this, hopefully making a couple of pieces that people can walk away with, not only from Triple Zero, but also from Michelin that celebrate this race or that celebrate Rennsport in a way that has a very race service feel to it. So not only will you be welcomed into this booth that hopefully is the coolest booth that you want to kick it at, but you'll leave that booth with a magazine, a hat, a sticker, or maybe a very, very limited chair or piece of Michelin swag that is only available at Rennsport. So really welcoming everyone there.
Yeah, I think it's a place that what I envision that presence, our activation at Rennsport is it'll be a physical manifestation of one of our missions, which is connecting dots.
That's great.
So if you think about this conversation, there's a lot of dots connected through. There's an arc through this conversation. And so, working with you and working with Modernica, I first encountered Modernica thanks to Luft. And Luft deserves huge credit for bringing new audiences into Porsche. And I remember standing there with a bunch of the old guard. And they're like, "Oh, look at all these young hipsters. This is terrible." I was like, "No, no, 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 no." I was like, "This is wonderful." I was like, "It's a chance for us to welcome them in as people welcomed us in."
Yeah.
But also that day, I was blown away by Modernica, that they were actually making things in California and furniture.
Yeah.
And little did I know I would go on to live in a mid-century house.
Yeah.
And at that time, at that house, I became fascinated by mid-century architecture and simple art. I'd always liked modern architecture, but in that house, we started buying things from Modernica and Knoll and things that, were down those roads of this sort of iconic mid-century design.
Yeah.
So, talking with you and mentioning it to you, and then you and I went and visited the factory, and I was fascinated to go back there years later.
Yeah.
And so tying that in with the 718 Spider and doing this first collaboration with them, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
But you'll also see other things to come, the state of mind of Triple Zero. There's some other collaborations where I frankly can't believe we're working with some of the companies we're working with. They have turned down some massive and much higher profile opportunities to work with Triple Zero. And so there's a lot of fun to happen. And maybe the first of those public facing people get a preview. And I loved your IP. I mean, you came with, "Oh, what if we did this?" And so we started talking about it. And I said, "Let's go, let's do this." So, to create, I think for me, that booth will be a place to connect dots.
Yeah.
It'll be a place for experiences for people and conversations, and some takeaways. There'll be some things where, Michelin contributed in no small part to that win at Pikes Peak in that streetcar with the Cup 2R, which is a hero lap tire effectively.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of work to make sure that was a good choice for Pikes Peak, because the demands at Pikes Peak are pretty extraordinary. And I have very little doubt that we would not have gotten under 10 minutes without the right tire, and that was the right tire. So to celebrate that with Michelin in that space at Rennsport with that car is something I'm really looking forward to. Michelin memorabilia is stuff that even when I was a kid, I mean, Bim Bimbo, all these things there was a lot of cool cultural items associated. So I'm looking forward to what we can translate and bring to fans there.
Yeah. Yeah. Ah, same, dude. Same. And what a journey. I mean, again, like maybe to conclude, anybody that reads or hears a blip of this, I think it's just wild. Like almost the charity work you're doing, like the amount of hours that we have put in to just setting up this booth, and we are a blip of what Rennsport is insane. But like hours and money and time to make an experience that's welcoming to general admission, right? Like, I think that it's a lot bigger than just selling magazines, right? It's that you really care about this community and you want to put something special there. And that's great. If you want to get a magazine or a subscription, by all means do it. But I really respect you for that, because outside of that one loser with that Cayman R, everyone in the Porsche community has been so rad and welcoming to me. And now to be with you and be a part of this and welcome even more people, long time or new, to that family is so cool.
Well, I have to respond to that. I'm so glad you brought up the Cayman R guy, because your Cayman R guy was my AC Bristol guy. I was young and at a vintage race. I don't know if it was Monterey or Sonoma or someplace, but Sears Point. But I came across a really, what I thought was a beautiful AC Ace. And I said, "Oh, nice AC Ace." And the guy got kind of stiff upper lip and he was like, he said, "It's a Bristol." And he was all mad about it. And so, those folks are always going to be out there. But
Yeah.
with regards to your larger point, we are just a blip. There are so many people who are putting so much into Rennsport to build this. There are so many individual owners who are contracting with 18-wheel trucks. There are all of these stage managers in the background. There's all these people at Porsche putting in the hours to do great things.
Yeah.
But it's at the end, you have to, like with what we're doing, I feel like we have to. I feel like people made space for me when I was the funny kid working at Costco with a 914. People made space. So we have to. And so our team, Alex, Rebecca, Amanda, the list goes on, Larry, Ryan, Don, there are Chris, there's a number of people, and then there will be authors and photographers. There's a lot of people, and then your team at Race Service, Max, and everybody else there. My feeling is we have to. People made space for us, so we got to make space for others. Like that's when things get rich,
and
that's
how rewarding that is. Yeah. Oh, it's incredible.
And I do want to circle back to one item from Rennsport. I don't know if this can be plugged back in earlier to this thing, but the kinds of experiences. I want to touch on one that's a little bit funny and odd, but super personal.
Sure.
And that's something that I would have imagined happening when I went to Lime Rock. Although I will say I met my wife of today on a flight out to the first Rennsport reunion in 2001. Rebecca was on my flight. That's a story for another day, but that's how we met on an hour-long connection flight on my way to Lime Rock for the first Rennsport. That's how I met my wife. But at the last Rennsport, at Rennsport Reunion 6, we had this booth, and my father-in-law came to help. And we had a golf cart, and I was racing this 1951 356. And my daughter was young, and we were, what was that now? 5. So she was 5 years old. And some of the books I would read her were Dwight Knowlton's books, The Little Red Race Car, and later The Silver Speedster. And the Silver Speedster was about a dad and his daughter racing a little 356 Speedster. And many of the drawings were from Laguna Seca. And little did I know that my daughter would go to the top of the corkscrew for the race. And my wife was like, "Let's get her out of here. Like, I don't want my dad and our daughter to get stuck in traffic and all this stuff." I was like, I think she really needs to be here. I think she needs to be here for that race on Sunday. And so they took the golf cart. They saw me off at the pits. And this is an also sidetrack, but I'm doing it. So another member of the community, Donna came along in her father's 356 Speedster that he raced in the 50s or 60s with this old 50s or 60s roll bar in the back. And as I was, getting ready or just getting back out of a practice session here was my father-in-law and my daughter, and here came Donna. And I said to Donna, I said, "Hey, Donna, would you mind taking Elle for a ride around the paddock in your Speedster?" And Donna's from Ohio, and she's the coolest enthusiast you will meet.
Yeah.
I got to introduce the two of you.
Please.
So Donna said, "Yeah." And I could see my father-in-law like, "What are you doing with your 5-year-old daughter? Letting her go with a total stranger that I don't know, my granddaughter in a Speedster, in a race car, in a paddock, at a racetrack." And I just looked at him and he knew what I meant. Donna can be trusted. This is family. It's okay. I know Donna well enough. I know her character well enough. I'm cool with her taking my daughter in a race car around the paddock. I also knew that they were only going to do like 10, 15 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So then I belted in and I go out in this race car. And, now Donna and my daughter, they're pen pals. Donna makes care packages for our daughter and sends them, and our daughter cherishes each thing in those care packages. So fast forward to race day Sunday. They see me off in the race car, And I'm really considering whether I even need the Hans device because the whole car is Swiss cheesed, and like I kind of figure if something happens, it's. But still, you go out in all your safety gear. We may edit that out of this piece or not. We'll see. So, anyways, they go up to the corkscrew, and I only realized it later after I came in after the race, and my daughter was just glowing, and I realized that she saw her dad racing in cars with the same face, the same Porsche face, that 356 face that established the face of Porsche to come. She saw her dad racing one of those at Laguna Seca, just like the dad, with the dad and the daughter in Dwight Knowlton's book, The Small Silver Speedster. So these are the kinds of things that can happen at Rennsport.
Yeah.
For any of the parents out there, read The Small Silver Speedster before you come to Rennsport, because you'll see, your children will see that book translated into real life with you, and they will never forget it.
Yeah, these experiences that are so special to us can be interpreted in such different ways, and we don't know those first experiences for kids. Maybe they're not into it. Maybe it's not for them, but maybe this race and this reunion is like the thing that starts it all, and that's special too.
Frank Wolitzer, who's known as Dr. 918, he's today so involved in so many areas of Porsche and the sports cars, but Wolitzer really made the 918 Spider, which I know is one of your favorite, if not your favorite car. So maybe as a 918 nut, you'll love this, because I haven't told you this 918 story. So after that race in the 356, and there was another 51, and we had a knockdown, drag out fight for the absolute slowest car at Rennsport. The other driver and I went at it for 20 minutes, and we had a 6 horsepower race basically between us. And after the race, and I got him in the end. He passed me twice. I passed him twice. And it was like knockdown, drag out in slow motion for the 2 slowest cars at Rennsport.
Yeah.
And after this race, my daughter was ecstatic, 5 years old. And she was they came to get me in the golf cart. And then I went to take them to the Volvo to get them out of there as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. And we ended up in the golf cart following Frank Wolitzer and Frank Wolitzer's wife. And they understood. From golf cart to golf cart, they were facing backwards, and my daughter was glowing next to me, and I was still in a suit, in a race suit. And Frank Wolitzer and his wife shared this moment because they have kids and they get it. Yeah, they could see. My father-in-law was facing the other way, but it was this very special moment. So these are like these tiniest blips that no one's heard about, but they're all over Rennsport. Yeah, from all sorts of ways. So it's on all of us to create as many of those as possible. If you're bringing a race car, get kids to come sit in them. If you're driving a race car, consider taking a kid around the paddock. Just slow it 5 or 10 miles an hour. I mean, obviously not too many of them. Yeah. Maybe we should edit that out of this video, because that can create paddock traffic.
Builds character.
But the point is, like, there's all these experiences to come. So I don't know if there's a way to edit that in or we'll leave it out, but that's Rennsport, man. There's so much there. Yeah. There's so much there to experience and to share.
Yeah, I love that. Dude, we did it. And we only went 25 minutes over, which for us is magnificent. That's
pretty good.
Pretty good. I'll give us a pass for that.